Finding clean, safe water was a daily challenge for early American settlers. There were no water treatment plants or bottled water, just creeks, wells, and a lot of uncertainty. To survive, pioneers developed some surprisingly clever ways to find, filter, and store water in a wild new land. These aren't just history lessons, they're practical skills that still matter for campers, off-gridders, and anyone who wants to be ready for anything. Let's dive into 5 forgotten water tricks early settlers used to stay alive, and how they could help you if you ever need to live off the land. Finding water with willow and hazel. Before maps and GPS, early settlers sometimes turned to an old folk trick to find hidden water: dowsing. You've probably seen the image, a person holding a forked stick, usually from willow or hazel, and slowly walking across a field. When the branches suddenly dipped or twisted, that's where they dig. Dowsing, sometimes called water witching, wasn't a guarantee, but for many pioneers it was worth a shot, especially when every drop mattered. Settlers believed certain woods, like willow and hazel, were water-loving and more sensitive to underground sources. A skilled dowser could find hidden springs or shallow groundwater that would have otherwise gone unnoticed. It's hard to say how often it truly worked versus pure luck, but there are enough old stories of successful finds that the practice stuck around. Once they picked a spot, settlers would dig a well by hand, sometimes alone, sometimes as a community effort. They might hit water at a few feet, or they might dig for days. When successful, the whole settlement benefited, and families marked the date like a holiday. While science remains skeptical of dowsing, the method is still used by some rural folk and off-gridders today. More importantly, it's a reminder of how resourceful people got when survival was on the line. Without dowsing, some communities may never have found their first well. The next time you see a forked branch, remember, for early Americans, a simple stick could mean the difference between hope and hardship. Collecting rainwater. Running water wasn't always nearby, especially in dry spells or on new homesteads. Early settlers learned quickly to take advantage of every rainstorm, and they did it with surprisingly effective, low-tech systems. Almost every cabin or barn had a rain barrel set up under the eaves. Gutters, sometimes carved from split logs, sometimes tin or wood, funneled water straight from the roof into barrels or cisterns. The bigger the roof, the more water you could catch during a downpour. Even a modest storm could fill a family's supply for days. Settlers didn't just use rainwater for drinking, though that was part of it. They used it for laundry, washing, watering gardens, and sometimes even livestock. To keep water clean, barrels were covered with wooden lids, flat stones, or even stretched animal hides to block out bugs, leaves, and sunlight, which can make algae grow. Some families filtered rainwater through sand or charcoal before using it in the kitchen. Storage was also key. A deep, shaded root cellar or cool corner of the cabin helped keep water fresh longer. During droughts, families learned to ration carefully, using gray water from washing to water crops or cool animals. This system might sound basic, but it was a lifesaver, especially in places where surface water was scarce or unreliable. And with no plastics, settlers used barrels made from wood, clay, or sometimes old metal washtubs. Today, rainwater harvesting is making a comeback with off-grid homes and sustainable gardeners. It's a reminder that sometimes the best solutions aren't complicated, just practical, time-tested, and right overhead every time the clouds roll in. Filtering water with sand, gravel, and cloth. Back in the early days, water from creeks and ponds wasn't exactly crystal clear. It could be muddy, filled with leaves, bugs, or worse. Settlers had to find ways to make it safer before drinking, and for many, that meant building simple, natural filters using what they had on hand. The most common method? Layering sand and gravel in a barrel, bucket, or even a hollowed-out log. Water poured through these layers would lose much of its dirt and sediment as it trickled down. The finer the sand, the better it worked. Sometimes settlers topped the filter with a piece of cloth, an old shirt, cheesecloth, or even animal hide, to catch bigger debris before it entered the main filtering layers. For extra cleaning, some settlers would pour water through the filter several times, or run it through a drip filter made from stacked pots or clay jars, each lined with cloth and sand. If there were any doubts about quality, water was boiled before use, a trick that, paired with filtering, made most frontier water safe enough to drink. This wasn't perfect, Microbes could still slip through, but it was a huge step up from drinking straight from a muddy creek. These methods also made water taste and smell better, which is no small thing when it's your only option. Modern survivalists and campers still use sand, gravel, and cloth filters in emergencies. The gear may be fancier now, but the principle hasn't changed. Let gravity and layers do the work nature intended. Early settlers knew that a few simple materials and a little patience could turn almost any water source into a lifeline. When clean water was a matter of survival, these basic filters made all the difference. Storing ice and snow for summer. Before freezers and refrigerators, keeping food cold in summer was a major challenge. Enter the early American ice house, a surprisingly clever solution for making winter's chill last all year. Settlers would start in late winter or early spring, cutting blocks of ice from frozen ponds, lakes, or rivers. This was no small task. Whole families and even neighbors would pitch in, sawing thick ice into squares, hauling them with sleds or horses, and then packing them in layers of straw or sawdust to prevent melting. The blocks were stacked tightly inside deep shaded pits or special ice houses, structures built partly underground, sometimes with thick stone or timber walls for insulation. The secret was in the packing. Straw and sawdust acted as natural insulation, keeping air pockets around each block and slowing the melting process. A well-made ice house could keep ice frozen for months, sometimes all the way through the hottest days of summer. Settlers used the ice to cool milk, butter, meat, and fresh-picked produce, anything that needed to stay cold and safe. Accessing the ice meant digging carefully and using just what was needed for the day. Ice was precious, never wasted on drinks or luxury. Even small towns often had a communal ice house so everyone could benefit. Modern root cellars and cold storage ideas owe a lot to these old ice houses. It's proof that, with teamwork and smart use of natural resources, early settlers could stretch winter's bounty and beat the summer heat. Long before electricity, a simple pile of ice and a lot of straw kept food fresh and families healthier well into the dog days of August. Purifying water with boiling and herbal remedies. Even after collecting, filtering, or storing water, early settlers still faced a big challenge, making sure it was actually safe to drink. Clear water could still hide dangerous germs, especially in times of drought or after heavy rains. That's why boiling became a daily habit on the frontier. Most cabins kept a kettle or iron pot on the hearth at all times, ready to boil water. Settlers would pour drinking water through their filters and then bring it to a rolling boil for several minutes. This simple step killed most bacteria and parasites, making even questionable water safer for everyone, from the smallest child to the toughest trapper. But boiling wasn't the only trick. Settlers also turned to the plants and herbs around them for help. In some regions, they added wild mint, juniper berries, or even pine needles to boiled water, not just for flavor, but because these plants were believed to have natural purifying or antibacterial properties. A handful of wild mint could make water taste fresher and possibly help with stomach bugs. In the South, settlers sometimes used sassafras or sweet gum bark for a similar reason. While not as scientifically reliable as boiling, these herbal remedies became part of the daily routine. Some families even brewed spring tonics, herbal infusions meant to clear the system after a long winter of heavy, salted food and stagnant water supplies. Today, boiling is still the gold standard for purifying water in the wild, and herbal teas remain popular for health and flavor. For early Americans, combining careful boiling with local plant knowledge was a powerful 1-2 punch against sickness, proving that survival is as much about tradition as it is about technique. Clean water wasn't a guarantee for early settlers. It was a daily challenge and sometimes a life-or-death struggle. But with patience, creativity, and a willingness to learn from both tradition and the land, they figured out how to find, store, and purify water in ways that still make sense today. Whether it was dowsing with a willow branch, catching every drop of rain, filtering creek water through sand and cloth, packing ice for the hot months ahead, or relying on a kettle and a handful of herbs, these tricks turned raw wilderness into a place families could truly call home. Modern technology has made water easier to find and safer to drink, but these old-school methods are still worth knowing, especially if you ever want to live off the grid, go camping, or just be a little more prepared for the unexpected. The real genius of early settlers wasn't fancy gear or endless supplies. It was using simple, reliable tricks, tested by time, to meet one of the most basic needs we all share. If you ever need to get by without a faucet or a filter, remember, the wisdom of the past is still flowing strong.